Well, good morning again. It is wonderful to be back here with you in person and to see your faces, at least half of them. And I never take for granted that we have a space where we can be fully seen and heard and loved, and that many people who are watching online, who may see this today or weeks from now, don't have that. And so I wanted to encourage those of you who may be seeing this after today, who are not geographically present, that you do have a place here. So this year, Ramadan, Easter, and Passover all fall on the same weekend. And I think it's important that we stop and pause and rest in the truth that so many people of faith find deep significance in the same time. And I'll let you all determine what you can grab from that. But for me, it's a reminder of the solidarity and the affinity that we feel with people who are seeking the deeper places in whatever space we do that. Now, today, millions of people within the Christian tradition are celebrating Easter, of course, and a day like this is always a little strange for me. Maybe it is for some of you here. Because as someone whose story began in traditional Christianity, well, a day like this is a reminder of the faith tradition that I once felt completely at home in and no longer do. This day is a reminder of the evolution of my religious beliefs, of the journey out of that old certainty. And so days like this are often confirmation as I drive past church after church filled with people who are part of my old story. Days like this are a confirmation of my unorthodoxy. In an organized religious world, it reminds me that I have a very disorganized spirituality now, which means I no longer fit in the old story. And many of us probably are in that in-between stories time, or in a state of renovation, or in a state of questioning. And I think I was always there, I just wasn't able to admit it. I wasn't able to admit all that I really didn't know. I think the honest people in this world, people of faith, morality, and conscience, we're always in transition. We're usually outgrowing something or asking a question or feeling slightly unsettled with the world that's in front of us. Now, if you're here at a community like UUPF, or you're watching online, or you have any interest in hearing me speak, well, you're probably in that shifting now, or you have been at some point in your journey. You've likely changed your mind about something or come to question the stories that you were raised in. And chances are you have confronted the religion or the politics of your past, and you've had to let go of some things in order to grasp what you are now holding as far as your belief system. Being a progressive human being, which I think all human beings should be, or specifically a progressive person of faith, I think you've probably found the person you are today arguing with your former self, or at least having a pretty serious conversation about your previous conduct and beliefs. I was watching the news yesterday, and on my social media feed, there was a scene of a full airplane of people. And in the aisle of the plane, there was a man strumming an acoustic guitar and other people standing and singing. And I wasn't sure what that was because I had the mute on, but once I unmuted it, I realized that they were, it was like a youth group or something, singing a praise song about Jesus in the middle of this full plane of people, many of whom looked extremely uncomfortable. And I think about the places where I was and realizing that there were many times in my life where some expression of public faith like that would have been to me my duty as a Christian. And now I find it a very different experience receiving it. But previously in my story, and especially in my capacity as a minister for decades, I often found myself on many Sundays standing in front of a group of people like this. And many times, especially on a day like Easter, I found myself speaking with authority and clarity and conviction about being certain of things. of publicly declaring something I was sure of, even if internally I was less than certain of it. And I think that's because the spiritual communities that I belong to, they prized that certainty and they applauded it. In my old story, certainty was a virtue, and questions or doubts or tensions were seen as character flaws. Maybe you weren't raised in that space, but I was. And since for me, as I got older, the questions and the doubts and the tensions became more commonplace than the certainty, well, I began to feel disconnected and misaligned in the spaces I used to feel completely at home. Now, some of you know my story, but 7 years ago, moving to Raleigh to minister at a local church, and a few months later, hearing God calling me to leave that church in the form of my pastor's voice saying, "You're fired," right? And I often drive past the Starbucks where that happened. To be fired at a Starbucks, it's not as spiritual as you think it's going to be. But the pastor said this to me really abruptly. He said, "We're letting you go. You don't fit here. You never fit here." And I was so angry and I was so insulted and hurt, and then yet he was right. He didn't know why he was right, but he was right because I was uncomfortable in the story that he believed, or at least the story everyone at that church was telling themselves that they believed. I was outgrowing it, and I was not going to be able to fit in it anymore. So yes, I was a misfit in that particular place and story. Maybe you've been a misfit at one time or another. I hope you don't feel that way here. I hope you feel oddly perfect in this place. But I wonder if you ever had the experience of feeling like a misfit in a faith community or a religious tradition, or maybe even now in a circle of friends or a neighborhood or a social group, because of the changing of your mind, because of a new understanding of the big questions. It's caused you problems in the small places. Because confronting the big questions or admitting the not sures is difficult, not only because of the existential crises that it can bring, but because of the way it changes the way we live in the intimate spaces of our ordinary lives. So because the big story of religion for many of us gave us a sense of purpose in the small things. Because growing up, I can remember I knew this, and I knew this, and I knew this, and that directed my path, or at least it explained things that troubled me. For example, evil I knew was the result of sin. And I knew that God had a plan, and when really horrible things happened, I could explain it all away as either the devil or it was God working in ways that I couldn't question, and so it really sort of tidied things up. But there was this nagging question in me that started to arise, things that I wasn't sure I believed, but was told I was supposed to believe. And I remember I was confronted this with my son at the time, Noah. He was about 7, and we're standing at the bottom of the stairs, and he said, "Dad, if God is real, why doesn't he talk to me?" And I said, "Well," he said, "seriously," he said, "he doesn't even answer me." He goes, "Hey, God." See, nothing. And so he goes, "If God is real, why doesn't he just speak to me?" And I said, "How would you like a donut?" It was a little easier to distract him from the big question when I didn't want to face the big question, but usually as adults, we can't do that. I have a good friend, and she's been a Christian for a long time, and she said to me, "John, I am in the middle of a free fall right now." She said, "I always believe certain things, and I used to have these fallback scriptures and platitudes and songs, and I had this community and this faith, this very specific belief system that I could fall back on." She said, "But now my marriage is struggling, and our finances aren't so great, and we're in a pandemic, and now I can't fall back on those old things that I was certain of, and there's so much that's unstable." And she said, "What do I do?" And she said, "I'm wondering what my spirituality can look like now that I'm not certain." And I said to her, "I think you need to stop focusing on or lamenting or being frustrated by what you are no longer certain of. to stop being frustrated with the belief that you've lost or the things you've outgrown, because that isn't going to make you certain of those things again. It's not going to rewind to a time when you were more secure or give you tidy answers to really messy questions. And I think times that we're living in right now, they make us miss the comfort of the old days or the simpler stories or the easy answers, or for me, the passing of the buck to God when things got really horrible. Every day people come to me and they express disbelief in the cruelty that we're experiencing and the inequity around us. And they're trying to make sense of life and the world. And they're trying to figure out the big and distant questions, the ones that tend to keep us up at night. The meaning of it all, the purpose for their presence, the reason that they're here. And they're trying to find some cosmic significance. And that's probably why they're exhausted. And it's probably why you sometimes are exhausted. Because whether we're people of faith, morality, or conscience, we've all asked unanswerable questions. What is the meaning of this life? How do we make sense of suffering? What happens after we die? How are we aware that we're going to die? Why am I here? I recently wrote a book called If God is Love, Don't Be a Jerk. And the subtitle is Finding a Faith That Makes Us Better Humans. Not finding a religion that makes us better humans. And it may seem like a small distinction or an exercise in semantics, but it's critical to sort of crafting a working spirituality after religious certainty, or simply having a life of greater empathy, one that has the capacity to love more people, and that's really what we're trying to do. And there are two problems that I usually have people talk about they have to reckon with. The first one is that small religion is really the problem. The undersized theology that doesn't really match what the person believes in. Now, that may not be difficult to admit that small religion is the problem, but the second truth is much more difficult to admit, and that is that all religion is small religion, at least compared to the subject matter, right? Because as a writer, my life's work is trying to use words to connect with other people on the universal parts of being human. But when it comes to the depth of grief, or the joy of being loved, or the anger at injustice, often the words that I have simply fail, right? They can point to those emotions, they can point to those experiences, those words can point to realities, but they can't contain them. Religion has an even greater challenge. It seeks with words to express the ineffable, to somehow describe and contain that by which definition cannot be described or contained and still be made of whatever we hope that is made of. Religion, or at least religious people and systems, often perpetuate what I would call the myth of figure-outable. The idea that somehow the infinite and the wondrous and all that beauty can be intellectually housed in our heads, and we can have a nice, tidy little belief system where there are no mysteries and no incompletes or no inconsistencies. I think as a result, we often spend too much time and energy trying to figure out the unfigure-outable. And in the process, I think we miss the opportunity to live presently a very pure and meaningful and beautiful life. So instead of asking the question today, why am I here? I encourage you to ask three different questions. Where am I? When am I? And who am I? Where and when have I found myself in this particular place and time in the history of this planet, but specifically this place and time in the history of America? More specifically in Raleigh, North Carolina, or Indiana, or Georgia, or wherever you're watching this from. And even more specifically than that, where am I? In what neighborhood, in what workplace, in what local community, in what family have I found myself? It's like when you're at the mall or you're somewhere at a resort and you're looking for the map, you need to find out what? Where you are to start. You have to orient yourself. So where and when are you right now? Because that's an extremely simple and precise and measurable fact. I know where and when I am, well, relatively, right? Depends on the morning. The third question is, who am I? I want you to think about this. What experiences have I had? What burdens do I carry? What pain do I see in the world? What needs do I see? What injustices am I aware of? What grieves me? What is my circle of influence? See, the when you are and the where you are, that's easy to determine, but so too are the who am I, if we really stop and think about what matters to us. So if I ask you where and when you are and who you are, the next question in light of that is, now what? See, if I determine that I am in this place and time, and I care about these things, and I'm troubled by these things, and I value these things, and I love these people, then how do I respond? There is always a here and now and small and doable response to everything that we question. There is always a figure-outable that we can live in. There are still mysteries and unknowns and incompletes, but there is something we can tether ourselves to and root ourselves in today. Viktor Frankl, who I mentioned earlier, he said, ultimately, human beings should not ask what the meaning of their life is, but rather must recognize that it is they who are being asked. In a word, each person is questioned by life, and he or she can only answer to life by answering for their own life. To life, they can only respond by being responsible. So when people come to me, and maybe you're in this room too, and you're inventorying how bad things seem to be, and you're lamenting how backwards we seem to be sliding and how the hateful people seem to be winning, and they ask, what should they do or what can they do? I always say this, something. They usually don't like that response, but I am not being flippant or facetious, because doing something in the face of the things that burden you is always better of the two options of something or something that doesn't really matter, or something or nothing. Here's what I mean. You may be worried right now. Worrying alone is not that something that you should be doing, because worry is a substitute for something. Worry is wasted energy on what has not happened yet. Or you may be angry, but that anger alone is not the something you should be doing right now. That is not where the meaning is. Anger is an internal alarm that something is not right, but you need to follow that up, right? And we're all grieving. But the grief alone is not the something you need to be doing right now, because the grief is an internal wound created by the wounds of the world. But transforming the worry and the anger and the grief into things are that something. And that will always change the planet in tiny, infinitesimal ways, but very real ways. There are millions of things right now that you cannot control, but there is always something you have agency in controlling, and that is where we find the meaning and the life today. So if I feel the world lacks empathy, I can live in a way that flows out of empathy. If I'm frustrated by people leveraging religion to harm and perpetuate inequity, I can allow my spirituality and my moral convictions to bring healing and bring equity. If I'm disgusted by the political system, I can engage that system by voting and volunteering and giving and running for office, which, by the way, I am not doing. If I feel social media is toxic and divisive, I can use my platform to care for other people and bring them together on things that they have affinity with. And on and on and on, friends. And ironically, in the here and the now and the small and the doable, that's where we can find the bigger meaning of this life. We find as much clarity in those things as we're likely to have on this side of the living. Frankl says we need to stop asking about the meaning of life and instead to think of ourselves as those who are being questioned daily, hourly. Our answer must consist not in talk and meditation, but in right action and right conduct. Life ultimately means taking the responsibility to find the right answer to its problems and to fulfill the tasks which it constantly sets for each individual. In other words, you really know what to do if you stop and ask yourself, what would a good person do right now? Or that. I've told you this story, I think, before, but I used to travel in the circles of Christian preachers, and I was at this evangelists gathering, thousands of people, and he's up there speaking with great authority on very big things, and he was eloquent, and he was quite sure of himself, and I was watching him, and all of a sudden I just said, he doesn't know anything. And I wasn't saying it in an insulting way. I just said all his training and all his years of study and all his time preaching and teaching hasn't given him any fewer incompletes than I have. He is dealing with incomplete information, and so he has questions that he can't answer, and you have questions that you can't answer, and we're all in that space of not fully knowing everything. The past decade or so has been me admitting the things I'm not certain of, asking the questions that I didn't think I could ask, and questioning the things that it was heresy to question. Because ultimately, I decided that if God was God-sized, then God wasn't offended by my doubts or threatened by my questions or intimidated by my vacillation. And so now when people like my friend Tiffany come to me and they say, now that I no longer believe what I used to believe, what can spirituality look like? I say to them, stop focusing on what you're no longer certain of the belief you've lost, of the things you've outgrown, but ask yourself one question: what do I still know to be true today? What do you still know to be true about the value of every human being? What do you still know to be true about the beauty you see in the world? What do you still know to be true about the injustices that you are aware of? What do you still know to be true about the things that keep you up at night? What do you still know to be true about the things that are valuable? And push into all the things that you know to be true, because there is a good deal of figure-outable stuff there. There is plenty of meaning and significance to be found. There's a singer I love, his name is Frank Turner. He's a modern singer-songwriter, and he released a song recently called The Resurrectionists. And I love the idea of letting that be who we are. I'd like to consider myself a resurrectionist, and that doesn't have to mean what it used to mean in my old context. But on a day when I still feel the muscle memory of my former faith, I can still embrace the idea of resurrection. I can still see this day as an opportunity to bring rebirth and renewal through here and now, and small and close and doable. I can craft a working spirituality that may not be what it used to be, but it can be meaningful and transformative. And most importantly, it can be helpful. The beginning premise of the book that I wrote was that if your faith doesn't make you a more compassionate person, then what's the point of it? Spiritual people should have lives marked by empathy and be in communities that are tangible expressions of that empathy. And so the right worldview, as we talk about all the faiths celebrating today, and as we talk about our very disorganized spirituality, the right worldview, or the correct belief system, is the one that enables you to be more aware of suffering in the world and propels you into other people's lives to alleviate that suffering. So may we be the resurrectionists on this planet, individually, collectively, the people who take up the lost causes, the hopeless cases, the foregone conclusions, people who see the hopeful and the unlikely and the surprises and seek to do something life-affirming. Viktor Frankl says, between stimulus and response, there is a space. And in that space is our power to choose our response. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. Well, today, in the here and the now and the small and the doable, in when and where and who you are, that is the space where we live.